Okay, as I said, bane of my life. Water observations from space, or we like to call it WOFs, came about because we had those massive floods in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, etc. back in 2010, 2011 and further. And what came out of that was a government commitment to provide a central point for flood information, which is to be hosted here at GA. It's made up of three pieces. It's made up of a repository of flood studies, so it's the modelling work that's been done by councils, basically contracted by councils. About half of the project is actually a revision of the information that goes behind that modelling, which is the rainfall and runoff information. It's being done by Engineers Australia. And what we were asked to do in NEO at the time was to have a look at historical flooding. So essentially, what flooding could we see from Landsat? And for us, that meant we needed to map surface water. So we had to come up with something which was robust enough to cover all of Australia with all of its various landforms and climate variables and so on, right through the archive across 2 satellites, which was an interesting challenge. We'd worked in flooding quite a lot around the time of those big floods. We had products at the time that we could use on individual cases, and they translated quite well across the landscape, but we found that if we tried to really broaden them out, we ended up in trouble, so we needed something new. As of now, we have actually processed the entire archive. We've gone right back to 1987 and up to, I think, the beginning of 2013. That particular product is still on our test server, but we expect that after a little bit more revision in the next week or so, we'll actually get it on our prod server and it'll go live in November. So the version that's currently sitting on our prod server, which is it's a web service which is open to the public, is only the 1998 to 2012 portion of that particular analysis. But essentially, the rest is done and will be released very, very shortly. Now, I'm jumping around here because a lot of you have seen this presentation before and a lot of you sort of know what's going on, but what I want to talk about in terms of the data cube was where we were with workflow development. And the thing that we found was every time we had a concept of how this should proceed, we smacked straight into a brick wall and everything fell in a heap. And it was because we were going from a concept of how do you do a process in a small environment, small regionality, to a massive one, where instead of thinking of a job as, right, I've got 5 processing nodes and I'm going to parallelize across those 5, we have thousands of CPUs to play with, which is a very different paradigm. One of the first things was that we had to say, okay, so we're going to have 1 job per node. Well, no, we need 1 job per CPU. Going down the line, the only way forward seemed to be MapReduce. So we're using a MapReduce methodology. That then leads you straight on to saying, oh, okay, so how am I going to manage this? We tried Hadoop, and Hadoop seemed to be the way forward, but we managed to crash this again and again, always hitting memory problems, CPU problems, that sort of thing. And the issue with Hadoop is, of course, that it is its own scheduler and file system type of interpretation. So when you put that on the NCI, it's like having 2 of the same things in the same place. They conflict with each other. So we ended up with a thing that we call side effect MapReduce, where Hadoop actually just runs the metadata. So it finds the stuff for us, tells everything how to act, but then the NCI is actually using all of the rest of it. All the data flow, all the connectivity is done actually directly on Lustre. So we're moving further and further away from Hadoop. And this is why we're moving towards Luigi. We're trying to get away from these things which are always in conflict and give us a faster flow. So to give you some idea of how that's translated in processing time, I think our first run just for doing water over about half of the continent took a couple of weeks. We can now do the water component of WOFs in about 3 hours. That's the entire time series across all of Australia. So it's a totally different paradigm simply by going through these iterations of what doesn't work in the workflow. So if any of you have ever had any questions about why we're doing it the way we're doing it, it's basically because we ended up getting a very sore head doing it the old way. The actual water detection methodology, so the thing that we actually run on the Landsat tile, is essentially a decision tree. I went across the country and visually interpreted 20 locations, so it's 20 tiles. Well, we talked about tiles and cells before. It's 20 cells, which means that within each 1 degree by 1 degree area, I actually looked at various different time slices or different time tiles within each one of those areas. So in the end, we had samples from 59 Landsat scenes. I pulled them out using visual interpretation and ecognition. So I would do a very, very basic segmentation which broke the image up into nice little pieces, pulled out an area which was homogeneous as a water or a non-water target. I created a fairly extensive classification of that, and that broke that down into single pixel samples. And by doing that, I ended up with a very large base of samples in order to do this. So there's over 2 million samples to play with to start with. I reproduced that method from scratch in order to do the test samples, so that we didn't just go, give me samples and split it up into training and test. I actually kept them completely separate from each other. So the actual training and the testing are done from the same locations, but they're done from totally different time periods, so that there's no chance of there being any crossover between our samples. What this produces for every Landsat cell, every tile, is a essentially 0-1, water not water, but also we maintain within the results how it was masked for pixel quality. So we can look back and see what's gone right and what's gone wrong with every single tile result. And we keep all of these individual water outputs. They're sitting in the back end, not actually in the data cube at this point, but they're certainly very close to it, so that if we want to, we can pull them out again. The thing is, it's no good for a public access data set trying to show people lots and lots of individual classifications on tiles. I mean, there's, I think, it was 620,000 tiles in our first run. I, at the moment, can't conceive of how to make somebody who doesn't really understand science and the public, have a look at that. So what we did instead was to create a summary product. And basically what we did was we counted up, so we just took a cell, added up all of the results in that cell so that we had the number of times we saw water in that cell. At the same time, we had a look and said, okay, this is the number of times we have managed to have a clear observation of every pixel in every cell. And so what that means is a clear observation was not masked for cloud, shadow, contiguity, or any of the other pixel quality types. So then we just have a ratio, one to the other, as a percentage, and we can say for this particular part of the landscape, we saw water this percentage of the time. That then generates another problem, which is, well, how do you know how accurate that is? Or how do you know, not necessarily accuracy of that particular result, but you're looking at a summary which actually takes a step away from the accuracy of the original water. So what we did instead was to generate a confidence for every pixel. And that was generated by comparing the results of the water against what other existing water products were there. One's MODIS product is in there, the open water likelihood product. The multi-resolution valley bottom flatness is in there. We did this by logistic regression. So essentially we had a look at, if we take all of these comparative data sets and put them together, how do they compare against ours, and what does that tell us about how confident we are in whether or not water really is there? So what this creates, first of all, just a very quick idea. For every time slice, we get this sort of output, water, not water. This, when you add them up, in just a second, produces a summary product, which we colour up looking like this. So red, very low frequency of observation, up into the blues and purples, which are basically very high frequency of observation. So it says that essentially down here, water's hardly ever seen, whereas there and up there, water's almost always seen. And if you just use that same colour spread there just to keep in mind, and hopefully this little beast will go where I want it to go. I'm a little concerned about this PC today. considering that.
Keep it in the summary product, do you keep the dates of when it was?
Not in the summary itself, but the idea is that we're going to pull out a time series analysis tool where you can pick any pixel and go straight down and find it. So you'll be able to do a trace and actually see when it was water, when it was not water.
It could be useful in the summary. I don't know. I'm just throwing an idea here. Like you have the rate, you got flooded 2 times.
Yep.
Right. 87, 92.
Oh, absolutely. It would be really good. And mechanically, the tool actually exists. We have a piece of code which lets us go to any pixel we want and pull up exactly which tiles it is when we saw water there. And we can get a list, and then we can do more work with it. But in terms of where we are with the project, that wasn't one of the direct deliverables. So we don't have that rolled out as a service. But certainly it's what we'd like to do. We'd like to have a proper interrogation tool which really went through and said, here's when it was wet, here's when it was dry. And further than that, we would like to actually be able to pull out longer term statistics of this water body is, it's being shown as wet 50% of the time, but that 50% all occurred in 1 year because, for instance, it was Lake Eyre, which only floods every so often, that sort of thing. So the whole question of perenniality and those things, they're all things that we're playing with at the moment to see what we can do, and we do have tests of that. Peter's been doing a great job of pulling out all sorts of statistical breakdowns of what the water's doing. But yeah, we have to actually turn that into a product. So at the moment it's still sitting there as a test, but yeah, certainly coming along.
Can I just also ask, in terms of your water classification, is it just a binary product, or have you sort of split it up into water quality types or water quality types?
At the moment it's simply a binary mask in terms of water, not water. But been talking to Stephen actually about how we could use it for instance, coastal work, because I'll just bring this up, while this particular product only shows the terrestrial coverage, the actual product is not constrained by anything other than what we call a coastal mask. So if we turn the coastal mask off, we get as far as Landsat has covered over the continent, which means we can then say we have a mask saying, here's somewhere where you could actually have a look and do a water analysis in order to determine quality. So we're thinking of seeing how we can make them play together. So give me a location you'd like to zoom into. Any? Tasmania? Oh, thanks. Let's pick the cloudiest spot on Earth. Yes, you're going to see all of the grumbly things that I don't like about my product. Excellent. Yes, cloud shadows. I mean, in terms of pixel quality, the pixel quality is pretty good. We catch probably, I'd say 90%, but that 10% is enough to give you a really sore head. It's an absolute pain. So if I jump into here, you're starting to see cloud shadow problems appearing in the landscape, and especially on the southern slopes in Tasmania is a great example. East Gippsland's another great one. Absolute horror. But having said that, if I go and have a look at some of these areas, here's one of those that I really like.
The red, yellow, and problem.
Yeah, generally what you're seeing is recurring problems will be in the very low frequency ranges, so they're going to be in the reds. When they're coming in the yellows, you're getting terrain shadow effects that aren't being corrected for as well. Another problem is that the solar incident angle in Tasmania is so poor that a lot of the time even a fairly flat surface doesn't give you a good reflection, especially in winter. And you can get the wrong answer again, and it's actually showing you what should be a typical water signature. So it's really annoying. We pulled plenty of samples out of Tasmania in order to train the model, but still very, very difficult. So this particular version, you can see it's very typical of a dark, wet winter forest.
We have the same problem. We have the other way around. We look at the forest and we pick up a lot of the...
Yes, exactly. It's part and parcel of the whole problem. Yeah, it's such a pain. But yeah, it's doing a lot of good things that we really appreciate.
Do you have an idea of like the dimensions, the optimal dimensions for a water body before it starts to impact your confidence in it?
That's a good question. I can tell you offhand that the way that the samples were picked, they're slightly skewed so that we don't pick up wet vegetation. That means that if you have a water body that is ringed by tall trees, which happens a lot, it's quite likely going to be excluded. Similarly, flooded forests will be excluded. And I can show you some great floodplains along the Murray and up in Queensland where the flood results actually don't look right. It's because there's a great big forest sitting in the middle of them. Come on, zoom out.
But that said, you also said with very small dams up in the Mitchell Grass County in Queensland where you get big flat.
Yeah. If they're not occluded, yeah.
Well, surprisingly small dams, just as absolutely nothing around it.
I've done the worst possible thing for remote sensing, which is to go to my backyard and have a look at for a continental scale product. And I've gone to the dam on property that I know has been wet for the last 20 or 30 years and full of water. But the pixel's telling me that it's sometimes full of water.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that's an edge effect issue because there's not enough pixels there
Yeah.
to get rid of edge effects.
How large a dam is it?
It's going to be about maybe 100 metres by 50 metres or something.
Yeah, you're pushing the edge. If you've seen
So
the...
it's coming up as about, 3 by 3 pixels.
Yeah, you're pretty much at the edge of the standard
Yeah.
for water detection.
There must be a lot of smaller water bodies there. So there must be an underestimation.
Yes, absolutely.
Just because there must be a myriad of tiny water bodies.
Well, there's a report by the New South Wales Office of Water, which basically they tried to do a standard one scene at a time analysis of what dams they could see, and they said anything lower than 2 pixels by 2 pixels was not going to be seen repeatedly, and that in general that accounted for more than half of the dams they wanted to see not being visible.
Right.
Because farm dams in typical are not half a football field.
I guess when you know what you don't know, it's the place to start.
Yeah.
Queensland years ago went through and marked every farm down that they could, like 2 million, some ridiculous number of farm downs, but it took for evaporation estimates. And then there was an idea to take that and see what they could see in imagery. So it just might be a data set worth people wanting to. How many of those manual
Yeah.
do you have?
We do have that data set, and if we ever get the resources to do the analysis, we'd be quite happy to do so.
There's another analysis going on at the moment, which is a comparison between this product and the one that the Joint Remote Sensing Research Program used. Adrian Fish is currently playing with both data sets to see how they come out. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Because if you do an analysis against the test samples, the classification accuracy is pretty high. But all you have to do is go somewhere where you haven't accounted for in your training samples, and who knows what your actual accuracy is. That's the difficulty with a continental scale product. How do you really quantify the accuracy?
Norman, your training sample, you had examples of water in different parts of the continent, and also examples of non-water.
That's right.
Those examples of non-water include the tricky bits like
Very
the
much.
hard soils,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah. Especially there's a specific class for black soils, such as you get in the Emerald area, the Roma area in Queensland, where it really goes pitch black, and then it looks just like water. There are classes there for bitumen. Big problem that we found were in Melbourne, typically cloudy, wet, poor sun angles, and then very, very big buildings casting massive shadows on bitumen, and they look just like water, over and over. As a matter of fact, I think if I go there, you'll see that a lot of them are still in existence. Yeah, basically what we did is we threw in a confidence filter, which was the urban areas. Anything with an urban area where you started to get multi-storey buildings, we knew that we were going to end up with a mess. So in this sort of area, you can see it here, these are building shadow related. But that's a hell of a lot better than it looked before we put that particular in. And here's this one here is pretty much the roadway and the shadow from the roadway. And there's a river sitting right underneath. So you've got all sorts of wonderful things when it comes to cities. So this is currently running as a WMS on the virtual server system sitting on the edge of the NCI. There is also a WCS that has been enabled on that, so you can actually pull the data down, but you can only pull the summary layers down. Well, the layers that you can pull down are these 5. So you can see, for instance, if I bring this up, here's the number of times we were able to see the ground, including the pixel quality mask. So it actually says this is the number of times that we clearly saw the spot. Then here's the raw number of water observations. So you actually can get back to the real number. Then here's the ratio without the confidence overlaid. Here's the confidence created by that logistic regression. And then this is, the filtered summary is the ratio where confidence is greater than 1%. And that gets rid of a lot of our leftover noise. For instance, there are some interesting effects like these ones here. The curious scene edge effects that aren't quite taken care of by the contiguity mask. A lot of these are caused because the original version of the data cube is a translation from UTM to lat long. So you actually get the pixel quality in effect on the original. It's then translated and you get a slight misalignment and you get leftovers, which is a little annoying. Hopefully the next version of the cube is not going to have anything like that. Are there any other questions?
Probably, I don't know, maybe when we offline, but I was going to ask, you said all the, well, 2 questions really. The individual scenes have been kept. I think that would be, even with all these things that you have been mentioning, that would be really useful for many of us, either having as a raster site somewhere and being able to access, or in the API as
Absolutely. Yeah.
Being able to say, okay, get this scene run in order.
Absolutely, and you can take it as you like it. You can use the summary product to say, you know, give me only those observations that I'm really confident in. Gets rid of the whole background noise. You won't see your flood zones, but you're going to see your real water bodies, which can be really useful, especially if you want to do water quality assessments. It is sitting in the RDSI under project number FK4. So if you want access, let me know.
It's moved to put it into
So you also access the website, correct?
No, what I was asking about is individual results.
The individual time slices are not in the web service. It's only the summary that's in the web services at the moment. But yeah.
Well, some way to interrogate beyond how many times this is affected. I want to know when.
Absolutely.
How often.
Yeah, we do have the, Stephen Ring wrote a little piece of code which just lets us type in where we are and we'll just do a pixel, we call it the pixel drill.
Yeah, actually both things, because at the same time, the same way we have fractional cover now, we want to have water
Yeah,
cover as part of the sophisticated things.
yeah, absolutely. And I'd be thrilled if you want to have a play with it to see if we can get you access to FK4.
Yeah, algorithms you used to process it. Are they available on the data system?
I think everything's in GitHub.
Yeah. So you can actually run it for subsets.
Well, I mean, the full WAF's run includes generating shadow masking, solar incidence angles and so on. The terrain correction stuff, which is actually what we feed into the pixel quality for this particular process, takes about 4 times longer to run than the water detection because it has to go through and work out all these angles for every single acquisition time. So we do have all of this for every single tile. We only run that once, thank God, and then we can go and run water as many times as we want. But that takes a while. But that's also a safe data set. So if you want to have solar acquisition angles and how we're generating the shadows at the moment and so on. They're there.
The big thing is we need to get user feedback and work out what activities that different groups actually do have components that are useful to other activities, whether they be processing or longer time calculations like that one, where we want to actually store that data in the queue, and that way people have got the building blocks.
Yeah. Well, because we have actually done this for the whole continent, it was one of the first ideas we had as a first product to put back into the cube as a derivative rather than an original.
We've got to be careful because we will eventually run out of this space, so the number of possible products is infinite. So we have to be careful of how much we actually store back and how many puzzle pieces we store back just because of the implementation time. And how much we just put the algorithms in and see if we can do your one-off. There's going to be some fascinating debates across the community as to what does and doesn't actually get permanently stored.
Sure. Anybody else? No? I think I better run away because I've used too much time. Lots.